My first question to anti-Israel, pro-Palestinians is, why the Palestinians? Why not focus on the Uyghurs? Why not focus on the Kurds? Why not people who really have been the subject of discrimination? And there's only one reason, and the reason is the alleged oppressor of the Palestinians is Jews. It's all at its core anti-Semitism.
Today we are joined by one of the most renowned lawyers in the world. Alan Dershowitz is a Harvard Law professor emeritus, a legendary criminal defense attorney, and he is a man who has spent his life in the legal arena, not concerned with controversy, but rather motivated by the ideals of democracy. Everyone deserves to be heard and has the right to a fair trial that is the cornerstone of a society that protects the civil liberties of its citizens. Mr. Dershowitz has argued some of the highest profile cases of our time. He is also one of the most outspoken Jewish voices in support of Israel. His books, including The Case for Israel and The 10 Big Anti-Israel Lies, have made him a lightning rod in a world gone mad at a time of anti-Semitism not seen since 1930s Germany. We are living in a bizarre reality where the act of terrorism is perversely considered resistance, where the word genocide is thrown around carelessly when it comes to the Jewish state of Israel's right to defend itself against those who blatantly call for its destruction. Alan Dershowitz has courageously not given in to the progressives, and he has since publicly distanced himself from the Democratic Party. In September 2024, he stated that his decision was primarily driven by his disgust with the Democratic Party's stance on Israel, which he views as increasingly anti-Zionist and anti-Jewish. This is not a time to be silent. We must together speak up against the indecency that is plaguing our values and undermining our hard-fought wins as free and just societies. We must speak up because never again is now. I am Israel Ellis, and this is The Unfiltered View, a companion to the wake-up call. If you have not done so already, please buy, read, and review my book on Amazon. Our currency in this world of independent media is your engagement. Please like this episode if you like it. Share it with your network. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment. We like engagement. Alan Dershowitz, very nice to meet you, and thank you very much for coming on The Unfiltered View.
Always happy to be on a program that promotes the truth.
You are a voice, and we appreciate having that voice here with us today. Just to give you a little bit of background, I'm a businessman, and this is not my profession, so you'll excuse me. But October 7th came, and my son is a Chayal. He's in the army. And of course, my wife and I were terrified. We came to Israel. We saw what was going on, and I started asking questions. And one of the most common question that would come back to me is how did this happen? And I ended up writing a book, The Wake Up Call, The Global Jihad, and the Rise of Anti-Semitism in a World Gone Mad. And I came up with 7 observations to how, and then I started this podcast in answer to the tsunami of false narratives out there that I was hearing. And I thought, you know what? We need a voice. And I'd like to try to be that voice. So I'm here today. It brings me today to meet with you. We'll get right to it. Do you mind if I call you Alan Dershowitz,
Please.
Alan, or Mr. Dershowitz?
It's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Alan. I really appreciate the informality. You have defended the civil liberties of some of the most controversial people of our time. You have challenged the ICC, the International Criminal Court, arguing its arrest warrants undermine the rule of law, criticizing its jurisdiction, and even offering to defend Israeli leaders. I want to ask you, Alan, today on The Unfiltered View, how would you present the case of Israel in the court of public opinion?
Well, it depends on which court it is. The court of public opinion in America, the court of public opinion in Europe, the court of public opinion on academic campuses, the actual court in The Hague, the court at the United Nations. A good lawyer always is on who the audience is and what the goal of the presentation is. The best answer that Israel has is the complete and total truth. My concern is, why the Palestinians? Why is the Palestinian cause, which is one of the worst human rights causes in history, I mean, I've done so many human rights cases on behalf of so many people. The cause of the Palestinians ranks just a little bit above the cause of Nazis and other fascists. No real case for the Palestinians. They could have had a state in 1938, 1948, 1967, 2000, 2001, 2005, 2007. They have never been interested in a state. They don't really support the two-state solution. They are interested in destroying a state. The difference between Palestinianism and Zionism is Zionism, the goal was to build a state, and it succeeded beyond all expectations, whereas the goal of Palestinianism is to destroy a state. When the head of the Palestinians testified in front of the Peel Commission in the 1930s, he categorically stated, we don't want a Palestinian state. There's no such thing as the Palestinian people. We are just part of the larger Arab country. We just don't want there to be a Jewish state. And so the case I would make would be a historical case first. There's no such thing as the Nakba. It's a fake. The Nakba is a self-inflicted wound. The Palestinians could have had a state larger than Israel functionally, and they could have gone on to live in peace. But they decided to attack Israel along with all the other Arab states. And that's what caused the emigration of some Palestinians, not all. The Palestinian population of Israel has grown dramatically. There's no Nakba. And if there is a Nakba, it's a self-inflicted wound. So my first question to anti-Israel, pro-Palestinians is, why the Palestinians? Why not focus on the Uyghurs? Why not focus on the Kurds? Why not people who really have been the subject of discrimination? And there's only one reason. And the reason is the alleged oppressor of the Palestinians is Jews. And so it's all at its core anti-Semitism.
You know, I often, when I talk about it in my book, when I talk to people, I talk about Israel and the Jewish people being the lovers of life, and Hamas and their supporters being the lovers of death. And it just is bizarre. It doesn't make sense.
You can just prove that by looking at the sources. The Jewish Torah talks about ubacharto b'chaim, choose life. And all of Judaism has been based on pikuach nefesh, the choosing of life. Whereas the Palestinians, and we have quotes about this, we have videos of it, say we love death just the way Jews love life. So this is not a speculation. This is a fact.
You know, Alan, I am right now in Israel at our Israeli office in Tel Aviv. And I have to tell you, every time I come here, I feel surrounded by love. I feel surrounded by life and vibrancy. And it's just wonderful. And when people talk about Israel the way they do, whatever the craziness that they say, it's the naysayers, and I talk to the detractors of the world, it's bizarre. It just doesn't make sense. The Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, publicly stated that he would arrest the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, if he came to Canada. That's a welcoming. Zoran Mamdani, the newly minted mayor of New York City, I'm sorry about that, by the way, said he would arrest Netanyahu if he came to New York City. What is your response to these threats?
Well, they're just threats. It can't happen, obviously. I'm Netanyahu's one of his lawyers. And if he comes to New York, I will be standing at his side. And if there's any attempt to arrest him, we will bring criminal charges against those who try to arrest him, because it's utterly illegal. If Canada tries to arrest Netanyahu, the United States will impose sanctions on Canada. We'll put the Prime Minister of Canada on a list of people who can't travel to the United States, who can't invest in American companies. We will fight back. And nobody will get away with trying to arrest Netanyahu. And Netanyahu will come to New York and will challenge Mamdani, and will go to Canada and will challenge the Canadian claims that they will arrest. The arrest warrant against Netanyahu is completely invalid. I know that because I was involved in it. Let me tell you the story. So I was one of Netanyahu's lawyers, and I was dealing with the International Criminal Court. And I was on the phone regularly with the deputy of the chief prosecutor. And we had made an agreement that before any arrest warrants would be issued, the chief prosecutor, Khan, would come to Israel would meet with the prime minister, would meet with the judge advocate general people, would go to Gaza, see for himself, and then they'd see, of course, there are no war crimes. That was agreed upon. The flights were arranged. The tickets were bought. It was all set. And then what happened is Khan was accused of rape, credibly, by more than one woman. And as the result of that, he made a decision, along with some of his Arab supporters, to issue these warrants without going to Israel in order to deflect attention from his own allegations of being a rapist. And that's what happened. How do I know this? The deputy told me that personally, because I had arranged everything with him. So if this ever becomes a court case, I am not only a lawyer, I'm an eyewitness to the fact that the issuing of the warrants was a corrupt act by a corrupt individual in order to deflect attention from credible accusations of rape.
It's another example of a world gone mad. Israel is a tiny strip of only 500 kilometers from end to end, smaller than the state of New Jersey. Why are we responsible for 98% of the world news? Why is Israel the hill that everyone is willing to die on? And is there any reason that can explain it outside of just pure hatred of the Jew? What is your opinion, Alan Dershowitz? Why are Jews in Israel held to such different standards?
Well, clearly it's a function of international anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has been a constant for over 2,000 years. It had a moratorium between 1945 and perhaps 1995 of half a century following the worst manifestation of anti-Semitism in the history of the world, obviously the Shoah. But that ended. And it ended as the result largely of university professors turning against Israel. And they turned against Israel on a dime when the communist regime in the Soviet Union turned against Israel. You can actually chart the entire issue. The Soviet Union was in favor of Israel. They voted for recognition in 48. And then in the early 60s, they began to turn against Israel when they saw the benefits that they could get out of oil and support from the Arab countries. And as soon as the Soviet Union turned against Israel, the communist parties in Europe, Communist Party in the United States, and their very hard left fellow travelers among socialists, Democrats, etc., turned against Israel purely as a result of the switch from the Soviet Union and then Russia. They were carrying the Soviet Union's water, and the Soviet Union proclaimed infamously, we're against anti-Semitism, but we're in favor of anti-Zionism. But clearly, they used anti-Zionism as a tool of anti-Semitism. And as a result of that, they killed many Jewish Zionists in the 30s, the 40s, and even the early 50s. Many of these were not even Zionists. They were people who had no interest in Israel. They were just people who were Jews, Jewish poets, Jewish artists. And they were murdered by Stalin as the result of being Jewish, but he claimed he did it because of Zionism. And so the conflation of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism really starts in the Soviet Union. Obviously, it was also part of Nazi Germany, but it's carried forth into academia in the United States. It's part of what I see as an even larger problem for the world, the destruction of academia. I have to tell you, Harvard University, where I taught for 50 years, has become a place of utter mediocrity. The Harvard Law School is utterly it's mediocratic instead of meritocratic. It's bought into this whole thing of not believing in meritocracy. One of its most prominent professors has written a book against meritocracy. And that's what's happened. Harvard has given up on meritocracy, and that's true of every major university. And who are the exemplars of meritocracy in the world? There are two exemplars of meritocracy: the Jewish people, who even in the face of discrimination won more Nobel Prizes and more awards and discovered more things than any other group on the merits. They are the poster children for meritocracy. And what country is the poster child for meritocracy? Israel. Because Israel, with no natural resources, with enemies all around, size of New Jersey, becomes an oversized contributor to world science and world technology, world medicine. So meritocracy has been the lifeblood of the Jewish people and the nation state of the Jewish people. And so the attack on Israel and the Jewish people is an attack on meritocracy. And it shouldn't be supported by anybody who believes in democracy, meritocracy, and judging people based on their own judgments. Martin Luther King put it better than anyone when he said, "I dream of a day when my children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." And that's what's happened with Israel. That's what happened with the Jewish people. And that's why the radical left is so opposed to meritocracy. And now they're joined by the radical right, who has their own anti-Semitic nationalistic bent. So we have a pincer movement against the Jewish people from extremes on both sides. Jews in Israel from centrism, and we're seeing an end of centrism and a movement toward extremism.
The world hates a good victor, and they'd rather the Jew be the victim. And I think that is probably the root of that. And again, it's just pure anti-Semitism. One would think that the prejudice would be countered by school and education, and yet nowadays, even at the most prestigious of schools, as you mentioned, Harvard, we see students create these double standards. It hurts. This bias that's holding Israel accountable even if the rest of the world is burning. As a professor, what actions would you take to effectively combat this anti-Semitism happening on our campuses from faculty and students?
Well, the key is admissions. When I was teaching at Harvard, the number of Jews on the in the student body was about 20%, sometimes a little even higher on meritocracy grounds. Then, when they moved away from meritocracy toward race-based affirmative action programs, the numbers went down to below 10%. When Harvard had a quota system, it was 10%. It's now below even that racist quota system. So it's hard for the smaller number of Harvard students to fight back. Also, it's having an impact on faculty recruitment. Fewer Jews are being hired to the faculties of major universities. Today, if you're a Jew and you're a Zionist, you have almost no chance of being admitted to a major university or being welcome to its faculty. That's why Jews are now hiding their ethnicity. We call them the hidden Yidden. The Jews who are no longer identifying publicly as Jews, if they want to get into colleges. College admission coaches are telling students, if you spent a year in Israel, leave that off your resume. Let them think you went to a mental hospital for a year. That'll give you a better chance of getting in than if you went to Israel. And God forbid you volunteered to be a lone soldier in Israel. Forget about it. You have no chance of being admitted to a university. When I was teaching at Harvard, some of my best students were former members of the IDF. They were a little older, a little bit more experienced. They brought to the classroom an enormous amount of diversity, but that's not diversity that counts because they're white and they're Jewish. And if you're white and you're Jewish and you're male, you don't count toward diversity at all.
It is the degradation of society. It is the destruction. Rome is burning. Nero is playing, and everyone, the world is the audience just watching this happen. We're going to talk about doxing websites in a minute. And I wanted to, one of my sons, who's a medical student, asked me to ask you this question. For people in professional school today, whether it be law or medicine, etc., would you recommend them laying low just to get through? And this is really hurts me. It just hurts me to hear this. This is what my boy is asking me.
No, it's a very
would you recommend they lay low just to get through their courses and focus on making a difference after graduation, or do you encourage them to speak up now while in school? And the problem is the intimidation and the fear of speaking up. What advice would you give my son?
It depends on who your son is. I would have to talk to your son. If he has a thick skin and can fight back and is up for the fight, I would say don't lie low. Just fight back. For others, yeah, lie low, get your degrees, become summa cum laude, become the best graduate, and then use your credibility to fight against others in your profession. You mentioned your son being in medical school. There was a recent survey that showed that doctors, more than any other profession, have high levels of anti-Semitism. And I see it in the medical schools. I see it particularly at Harvard, in the Harvard School of Public Health, which is a sewer of anti-Semitism. Nobody should support the Harvard School of Public Health. I would be completely in favor of cutting off all funding to the Harvard School of Public Health, not to the Harvard Medical School, which does great things. But the School of Public Health is a propaganda school, along with some other parts of Harvard. For example, the Harvard Human Rights Program, the Carr Human Rights Program at Harvard, has nothing to do with human rights. It's all about the human wrongs of Israel. And so you have to look at particular departments. The Divinity School at Harvard, in the name of Jesus, preaches hatred and anti-Semitism. And so if I were the president of Harvard, I'd dispense with the Divinity School. There's no real room for a Divinity School at a university anyway. The School of Public Health, I would totally reorient and change, and make sure that the school is not being used as a propaganda vehicle against the Jewish people, because American universities are becoming the University of Munich in 1933, and the University of Berlin in 1934. Where students were discriminated against purely on the ground of their being Jewish. That's happening today. And we're going to see a trend in that direction, that Jews are no longer going to be picked for things by other people. They're going to be not admitted to elite universities, not admitted to the faculty. They're not going to win Nobel Peace Prizes or literature prizes, maybe even a cutback in Nobel Prizes in the sciences. Jews will have to make it on their own. What happened during Tsarist Russia? Jews couldn't get into universities. They couldn't get jobs in the government. So what happened? They became the best chess players in the world, the best violinists in the world. Later on, they invented the computer technology in their basements. I think Jews are going to have to be more self-reliant than they had to be during my generation. Look, when I graduated law school, there was plenty of anti-Semitism. I have to be a little egotistical to make this point. I'll start by saying I was a terrible high school student. I had a C average in high school. But once I got into straight A student, and I was first in my class at Yale Law School, editor-in-chief of the Yale Law Journal, and a Supreme Court law clerk, and I got turned down by 32 out of 32 Wall Street law firms who just didn't want Eastern European Jews with names like Dershowitz in their firms. And so we had to fight back against that. And we did, and we succeeded. And now some of the biggest law firms that discriminate against Jews have Jews as their managing partners and are, 20 or 30% Jewish. So we fought back successfully. That fight continues, and we have to be ready for it. And it depends on the personality of the individual. Some people are better off fighting back initially, right away. That was certainly me. I fought back right away. I would have no ability to remain silent, but others can just get through and then use their credentials to help the Jewish people after they graduate.
My son is a Dillard scholar, and he did a program called Stand With Us when he was in high school. I would strongly urge parents to send their children on these programs because they teach them to speak truth, objectively, balanced, and to understand the argument that's being presented in the tropes of what is going on campus. And we talk about what has infected into the streets. One of the tropes that we see often, one of the tropes and that has become very loud and proud out there is the slogan, if I can say slogan, from the river to the sea. We've all seen it in the banners being held by people marching down streets and being chanted. Alan Dershowitz, is the river to the sea an incitement to violence?
It certainly is advocacy of violence. It's certainly, along with globalize the Intifada, these are advocacy of violence. Unfortunately, advocacy of violence is protected by the First Amendment. So we have to fight back, not in the courts necessarily, but in the marketplace of ideas. And we can win if we galvanize and get together. The problem is that the media, the New York Times, CNN, have turned against Israel as well. And they don't give an opportunity for response on their pages. So we have to find alternative media. TikTok has obviously become a force of anti-Semitism. And, reading TikTok is like going to a Nuremberg rally in the 1930s. Everything is directed against Jews. I get emails and texts and calls. I got a call last night at, midnight. Fortunately, I turned my phone off, but they left a message, demanding that I commit suicide because I'm a supporter of Israel.
I get some pretty good ones too.
Yeah.
What would you say that particular slogan represents? What does it mean from the river to sea? What has to happen?
It means no Jews in the Middle East. It means that the Middle East is Judenrein, that between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, where Israel exists, would no longer be a place where Jews could live, either as Israelis or as guests or as dhimmi, second-class citizens in a Muslim state. It's a call for the end of any Jewish presence in the Middle East, as is globalized the Intifada. So let's not mince words. These are anti-Semitic slogans, without a doubt, protected by our First Amendment, not protected by Canadian speech laws, not protected by European speech laws, protected only by American speech.
Would you say it's a call to genocide?
I would say it could be understood by some as a call to genocide. But remember, the president of Harvard said even calling for genocide of the Jewish people is not necessarily something Harvard would take seriously. It all depends on context. Fortunately, she's the former president of Harvard. But her appointment as president by a corporation headed by a Jew was the beginning of the decline of Harvard.
You are one of the top legal scholars in the world, and I have a question for you. I was recently on an Air Canada flight from Toronto to Atlanta. I became very upset because there was a flight attendant wearing a pin under her Air Canada, her pin, and we'll put that up on screen, in the shape of Israel. The pin was in the shape of Israel, but with the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the center, surrounded by the keffiyeh patterns that we've come to know, and the black, red, green, and white of the Palestinian identifiers at 35,000 feet. Call me crazy. I think we've been here before. I felt unsafe, discriminated against. I felt harassed. She noticed that I was wearing this Star of David, my Star of David and my Golani necklace. I wear this in honor of my son. God bless him and all our lone soldiers and all the soldiers of Israel. And I felt completely, her attitude completely changed when she saw me and my wife. And but I felt betrayed. Honestly, Alan, I felt completely betrayed. And I was not comfortable with someone who's loyal to a jihadist movement, being responsible for my safety and well-being. People have come forward as a result of my social media post that she and others in Air Canada have done this on several flights. So thousands of people have been affected. I've had Air Canada pilots calling me, telling me that it is out of control and personally apologizing. I complained to Air Canada and I received a "We are sorry" letter with an admission that this is against the policy of the airline, and this is now a private, confidential matter, but they gave me a $500 credit. They paid off the Jew. I feel that this is not a transactional issue between me and the airline, but rather a public issue. I quoted Elie Wiesel's The Sunflower, where he was asked, I don't know if you recall, he was asked to provide a forgiveness to a dying Nazi soldier. And after he debated, Elie Wiesel came to the conclusion that it was not his place to provide that forgiveness. I also feel very strongly, actually, that my human rights were violated. Do you, Alan Dershowitz, think that Air Canada has violated me? Do you think there is a claim against that airline here?
I do, especially since there's obviously a double standard. If some Israeli who was hired by Air Canada wanted to wear a comparable pin calling for the end of the Palestinian people, I don't think that Air Canada would permit that. They would say no politics allowed. So they apply an obvious, invidious double standard in favor of Jew hatred and against support for Israel. So I do think you have a valid claim. And I'm not sure. Air Canada is a quasi-public, quasi-private company that I'm sure gets some support from the government. So I think you probably have a strong argument.
Do you think I have a civilian case against them?
Yes, I do. I think you have. If you can demonstrate that they are applying a double standard and would not allow a comparable anti-Palestinian pin to be worn by somebody. Look, an airline has the right to say no political pins at all, but they don't have, if it's a government airline, a government funded airline, they don't have the that certain pins are allowed and others are not.
So the issue is this, Alan, it's against airline policy to wear any pins. And they actually have it in their code of conduct of employee handbook, which I have read. It is against their policy. But here is my issue, is that there is a license. There is a license out there where government officials and people working in public services seem to feel that they are licensed to have screensavers saying free Palestine. In streets, you've got, often I see hashtag sanction Israel or stenciled into the street. Baby killers, I see it and everywhere you look. It's become prevalent. It's a subversive form of anti-Semitism. There was a woman who went to have her passport renewed at the Canadian passport office, and she was told she had to put down Palestine on her passport when she wanted Israel, and eventually she fought it. They claimed that Palestine was a state, but I think that we need to fight back. I think that we have to stand up and our voices need to be heard because there is a subversive form of anti-Semitism, and this is what I don't think Westerners get, that is infiltrating through every part of our society.
Look, I agree with you, and here people will disagree with me, but Canada gets a free pass. Canada was one of the worst countries in the world during the Holocaust and in post-Holocaust days. Let's remember the story that when Jews tried to get in, the numbers were very limited, and the Minister of Absorption infamously said even one Jew is too many. As soon as the war was over, Canada opened its gates to Ukrainian Nazis by the hundreds, by the thousands, by the tens of thousands. And they applied a completely double standard. And under the current prime minister and the predecessor prime minister, we have seen Canada becoming an enemy of justice and an enemy of Israel. I would like to see the current Canadian prime minister sanctioned by the United States and not permitted to travel into the United States. Particularly if he ever threatens to really arrest Netanyahu. And I would be in favor of bringing some action against him if he tried to do that. The problem is Canadian law won't permit him to do that. Canada has some great Jewish advocates, Erwin Cutler and others, who can help expose what's going on in Canada today. But of course, it's Erwin Cutler's party that's doing this. And away, of course, from the left and turn toward more conservative Canadians. That's true. And that's true in the United States. And it's becoming increasingly true around the world that the left has become, as the Socialist Democrats of America put it in its platform, you can't be a socialist and be pro-Israel. If you're a socialist, you have to be anti-Israel and essentially pro-Hamas, because that's what it turns out to be.
I refer to them as the illiberal liberals. In October, you said in a National Post interview, you said Canada is now an enemy of Israel. I believe those were your exact words.
Right.
You've obviously stated your chagrin with our prime minister and with Canada, but can you elaborate on what you meant and how exactly do you believe that Canada has become an enemy of the state of Israel?
In so many different ways, by threatening to arrest the legitimate prime minister of the only democracy in the Middle East, by recognizing a Palestinian state without even demanding of a Palestinian state that they recognize Israel, by fomenting anti-Semitism at so many levels. Canada has become not only an enemy of Israel, it's become an enemy of the United States. Now, obviously, that can backfire. I think the current prime minister of Canada benefited from the attack that Donald Trump leveled against him during the election, and probably or may very well owe his election to a reaction to what Donald Trump said. But I think we have to stick to our principles. I am I am not a friend of Canada anymore. I always regarded Canada as the friendly nation to the north. The people smile. They're very nice, the individuals, but the government of Canada is an enemy of Israel. Not, but the current government of Canada, an enemy of Israel, an enemy of the United States, and an enemy of justice.
Alan, I am third generation Canadian, and I feel unwelcome and I feel betrayed in Canada. I feel unsafe at times, and I am just so disappointed. As a Jewish person, as a business person, it is a terribly painful event, I think, for all Jews. You mentioned the recognition of a Palestinian state, and I want to ask you, are there any legal requirements? First of all, can you explain to us the legal requirement, if there are any, to become a nation state? And are there any grounds for the declaration of a Palestinian state?
No, obviously, there's no grounds for it, and there's no legal basis. It's a purely political decision based not on support for the Palestinian people, but on opposition to Israel. It has nothing to do with the Palestinian people. They do not want a state adjoining Israel. They want a state replacing Israel. So when you recognize a Palestinian state, you are implicitly calling for the end of Israel. And there's no two ways around that. Ask the Palestinian leaders themselves. They will acknowledge to you that the only basis for a Palestinian state is as a replacement state for the nation state of the Jewish people, not as a state sitting alongside Israel in peace. But, most Canadian people don't realize that. And so they follow their leaders. Look, I worked very closely with Pierre Trudeau. He was the good prime minister of Canada back in the 1960s and 70s. I worked with him and with Irwin Cotler and with some other leading Canadian political figures on the War Measures Act when the Quebecois were engaged, some in terrorism. And so, and I've spoken in Canada many, many times at most of the major universities in Canada. But today, I am not a friend of Canada. I am not a friend of the Canadian government. And you can't count on friendship with America if you turn against Israel as you do. Because, again, I want to emphasize that recognizing a Palestinian state essentially means acknowledging that Israel has no place. It recognizes from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Free what? Free of Jews. Judenrein, much the way Germany.
There is definitely an eerily so a parallel between the propaganda of normalizing and demonizing the Jew of the 1930s, that if you study Goebbels' propaganda at that time, and if you look at the propaganda of today, there's eerily similarities between these propaganda objectives. And I just sit by, I stand back, and I don't stand back, and I certainly don't sit by, but my breath is taken from me. Honestly, Alan, people say why, but my breath is really taken from me because I have grown up to believe in the decency of the human being. And I am watching before my eyes the unbelievable reality of the bizarre twist where society is eating itself out from the inside. And on November 17th, when the Palestinian flag was raised at the City Hall of Toronto and across Canada, I sat aghast, as many of us did, because this wasn't just the raising of a flag to declare a state. This was the reward for the brutal murder of 1,200 Jews and the kidnapping of 250 people, hostages of dead and live people, and the kidnapping and the commoditization of human life to use them as a tool of negotiation for the madness of terrorism in this global jihad war. And yet Canada stands, and other democracies and other Western civilizations, they stand in support.
Yeah, so does New York City. And the blame for it must be shared among many people. But I think, for me, the primary blame for this goes to Jews. Jews who supported Mamdani, Jews in Canada who support the current government, Jews who support a Palestinian state that doesn't recognize Israel, Jews who support from the river to the sea. We have a deep, deep problem in the Jewish community among self-hating Jews. like Noam Chomsky and Norman Finkelstein, and there's so many, Reinhardt. These are people who have turned against Jewish values and are trying to say we're not anti-Semitic because we can't be, we're Jews, but you're self-hating Jews and you're anti-Israel Jews, and that's even worse. We have to fight back, and we have to clean our own stables.
I had the misfortune recently of interviewing Norm Finkelstein, and I'm going to say misfortune because it left me feeling sick. And I've interviewed some others, and what I find is that they all have a playlist. They all have a playlist, and they say the same things. In October, you spoke at the Rage Against the Hate conference in Manhattan for the Israel Law Center, and it was there that you said that the vast majority of Jews in New York City were the ones who tilted the vote in favor of Mamdani. Talk about eating your nose to spite your face. That obviously is a big problem with our own people. Why? What happened here? Where does the self-hate come from?
First of all, they're not our own people. These are people who are Jewish primarily on their parents' side. Most of them have no identification with Jewish institutions, with Israel, with Jewish values. They just happen to have been born to a Jewish mother or a Jewish father. They don't care about the Jewish people. They don't care about Israel. But the enemies of Israel use them and exploit them because they always start their statements by saying, as a Jew, I oppose.
As a Holocaust survivor, as a son, as a grandson. Yeah.
And, so we have to fight back, and we have to make sure we argue these issues on their merits, not on who says them. Because we're always going to get, look, some Jews voted for Hitler. Jews voted for Mussolini. Jews were part of the communist mechanism that murdered Jews. There were Jewish capos. That I understand because they had to defend their own lives and their own families. But what I don't understand is Jews in New York who vote for Mamdani. I don't understand Jews in Canada who vote against Jewish interests. I was a Democrat for the last 60 years. I started supporting Democratic candidates when I was 14 and 15 years old. I am no longer a Democrat. I'm not a Republican, but I'm an independent. But I can't support a party that nominates Mamdani to be the mayor of New York. And remember, Mamdani goes to a synagogue, and he says that a sacred place like a synagogue shouldn't allow immigration campaigns for Israel. Who is he to tell, the rabbis of Jewish synagogues what to allow on their premises? Zionism is a very important part of Judaism. Let me say one word about Zionism that people fail to understand. Zionism was the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. It started, in the beginning of the first century. My wife owns a gold coin dug up in Israel that was from the Bar Kokhba revolt in the first century. And it says, for the freedom of Zion. So Zionism goes back 2,000 years. Political Zionism starts with Pinsker and Herzl in the 19th century. It was the national liberation movement to establish Israel. It succeeded. Zionism succeeded. I'm old enough to remember what the original Zionist national anthem, Hatikva, ended with before 1948. Lashuv la'aretz avotenu, to return to the land of our fathers. It got changed in 1948, Leotam Chavshi B'Atzenu, to remain a free nation in our land. So, you don't have to be a Zionist. Zionism has succeeded. Be an Israelist, somebody who supports the right of Israel to exist. We don't need labels. We don't need claims, but Israel exists. Zionism succeeded, just like the American Revolution succeeded. I'm about to finish a book that'll be out on July 4th, comparing the founding fathers of the United States with the founding fathers of Israel. The name of the book is called Founding Fathers and One Jewish Mother, Golda Meir. And it compares the founding of America with the founding of Israel. And, the revolution succeeded. Zionism succeeded. America has now lasted 250 years. Israel will last many more than 250 years, but we have to struggle to keep its existence from becoming an issue. And we shouldn't be debating Zionism. It succeeded. Israel is an established fact. It's not subject to debate.
Alan, as an interviewer, I have been warned against interviewing people, giving people a platform who have these opposing views. I went against that. I decided that I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to interview a series of these people. I interviewed Norm Finkelstein. I have to tell you, I needed to take a rest after that one. Do you think that it's wrong to interview these people? Do you think that we're giving them a platform? Do you think it's a good idea to interview them and counter them? And tell me what you think of Norm Finkelstein.
He's a fraud. He's a phony. He's not an academic. He was fired essentially from every institution he ever worked in, based on his lack of scholarship. I've read everything he's written. There's not an original word in anything he's written. He accused me of plagiarism. Harvard University did a thorough study and debunked what he said and said there was no basis for it at all, that my book, The Case for Israel, was a legitimate scholarly work. So, I don't think he should be taken seriously. I have no problem with people interviewing him and interviewing others as well. It's a question of choice. The marketplace of ideas should be open to everybody, and there should be an opportunity to debunk his falsehoods. And
I feel that it's important that we know what we're up against, and it's important that we discredit them and we flush them out. Along those lines, there is a momentum calling for the release of Marwan Barghouti. He has been and I didn't even want to be involved in that. That's an Israeli decision. Israel should make the decision based on its rule of law. Barghouti was legitimately convicted after a fair trial of crimes that require imprisonment. People free imprison people all the time for good and sufficient reasons. I leave that to the Israeli government. I'd like to, we talked about the doxing of websites that take publicly available information and list Israel's lone soldiers in one place, even emphasizing those who served in Gaza recently and those who have paid the ultimate price. And this is obviously an indecent act and with insidious intent. I've written an article on this called The Hunting of the Jew, and I've lobbied for such sites to be taken down, and yet I am met with the argument of free speech. Though this is an obvious incitement against these young men and women who have served courageously, in your opinion, do websites like this constitute hate speech? And has the line been crossed? And under what logic or law can they be shut down?
No, I think it depends on the facts, and it depends on which country. Hate speech is permissible in the United States. It's not permissible in Canada. Clearly, it's hate speech when you are trying to get people to turn against other people. On the other hand, I'm in favor of disclosing the names of professors and students at universities who have made horrible statements about Israel or prevented students from coming to class.
Do you still believe in a two-state solution?
In theory.
Okay.
I think it will take time, and I think it can't exist when Gaza is ruled by Hamas. I don't think the Palestinians are ready for statehood at this point. On the other hand, I don't like the idea of Israel maintaining control over many hundreds of thousands of Arabs without equal rights. So I think it's a question. I'm not in favor of unilateral recognition of Palestine as a state the way Canada did.
Is Trump a friend of Israel?
Trump's a friend of Israel.
Can we count on his support?
Nobody can count. Jews can't count on anything, ever. Jews have to be self-reliant. We have to make sure we can go it alone. Israel has to make sure it has the military capacity to stand alone and fight. It stood alone in 1948. It didn't have support of any country, not the United States, not even in 67. It wasn't until 73. So Israel can't count on anybody. It should always...
I'm sorry. This is my final question to you, and then I want to get into talk about your books very quickly. What is your position or recommendation of the future of Gaza?
I wish Gaza had gone back to Egypt the way it was supposed to during the Camp David agreements. As you know, Begin wanted Gaza to be part of Egypt. The Egyptians refused to accept it. It's very, very complicated. It can't be controlled by Hamas. And right now, if there were elections in Gaza, Hamas would win. If there were elections in the West Bank, Hamas would win. So the question is not a two-state solution. Today, the question is a Hamas-dominated two-state solution, and that would be an invitation to disaster.
You've written, you're a very accomplished writer, author, lawyer. We all know that. You've written some interesting books. I read The 10 Big Anti-Israel Lies. I think it's an excellent book, and I think it's especially a good read for anybody who would like to, thank you very much, who would like to understand how to counter all of these tropes in the playbook. Israel is colonial. Israel denied statehood to Palestinians. Israel ethnically cleansed Palestinians. Apartheid state. Israel is guilty of genocide and forced starvation and two-state solution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's an excellent book, and it definitely provides the munition that people need to stand up and be heard and to fight against a world gone mad and the madness that's going on out there. You've also have a new book out. You've had a book that you've just recently released called The Preventative State. Can you tell us a little bit about what that's about?
Sure. It's about how states like Israel have to move far more quickly toward prevention rather than reaction. And it sets out a theory of how a state, a government, the subtitle tells it all, the challenge of preventing serious harms while preserving essential liberties. It tries to strike an appropriate balance between moving preventively, which we have to do, whether it be for COVID, whether it be for the environment, whether it be for terrorism, and also maintaining civil liberties. So the book is a serious, though written for a public audience, book about how to strike that balance. And then I have these pamphlets that I've been giving out on college campuses free. And the newest one is called Jewish Blood is No Longer Cheap, a call to arms in preventing recurrence of past disasters. And it basically talks about how we can no longer sit back and just accept victimization.
Is that Is that available on Amazon, or is it available electronically? Okay, great. Okay, a little bit of fun here, very quickly. From my kids, if you could represent anyone in the history of the world, who would it have been and why?
Very easy. I would have represented Jesus of Nazareth on charges that he violated freedom of speech by proselytizing, and I would have won the case. And then the Jews couldn't be blamed for killing Jesus. They'd probably be blamed anyway, because if Jesus had been acquitted, there'd be no Christian religion. So Jews would be blamed in either case. But that would be my ideal case, representing Jesus.
Alan Dershowitz, thank you so much once again for coming on the Unfiltered View. And for the people who are listening today, you've got the choice of not listening, and you've chosen to listen. Alan, you have the choice of not speaking up, and you've spoken up. And I really appreciate. I am Israel Ellis. This is Alan Dershowitz, and we are the Unfiltered View, the seekers of truth. And I hope that you'll like this episode. I hope you'll engage with us and comment. I think, Alan, that we'll see all of your comments, so make sure it's up with that. And please subscribe to our channels. In this world of independent media, you know, I can't even market my book on Amazon because it has to do with October 7th, and they claim that there are claims of publishers that say the events of October 7th are unsubstantiated, if you could believe that. So please purchase books written by authors telling the story, and subscribe and share these podcasts. It's very important we stand up and get the information out there. Thank you. Thank you once again for tuning in when you could always tune out.